Governor, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Appreciate you having me, Sean. Thank you very much.
You know, the funny thing is, like a lot of things in life, I think there's the headlines and then there's the behind the headlines, the bigger part of the story. And it's funny, like you fit that depiction. I often tell people when I meet people, part of the reason I wrote a book is because I felt like people had this image of me. And it doesn't mean you have to like me or dislike me, but I didn't think people had a full understanding of who I was as a person. So when I left the White House, I said, I'm not writing a book. And slowly, after like several months of going to audiences and having conversations, people would say, oh, I read once that you're like this and you're like that. And I finally called up somebody I know. I said, I got to write a book. I'm tired of people talking about who I am as a person because they read some silly story in Politico or the New York Times. And as I went down rabbit holes getting ready for this interview with you, I felt kind of the same way. I was like, I never knew that about that guy. But I want to start with something interesting because obviously you're in the news recently because of this pardon that President Trump issued on your behalf. And so I just want to start with this. Like, how did you first come into Donald Trump's orbit?
Well, yes, I'm here today, fully pardoned by President Trump. I went to bed Super Bowl Sunday as a convicted felon. Then I woke up the next morning after he pardoned me, no longer a convicted felon. President Trump did that for me 5 years ago on this day. He commuted my sentence and sent me home from prison after I spent nearly 8 years there, 2,896 days. And then years before that, actually, 11 years before that, I was on his show, Celebrity Apprentice, where he correctly fired me because our team lost to the women and I was the project manager and I wouldn't sell out the rock star Bret Michaels. And so I got canned. President Trump was right to fire me then, and that I would argue right to free me 5 years ago. And thank goodness, God bless him, for pardoning me. And he was right to do that too, because I didn't break a law, cross the line, or take a penny. And I learned a lot of hard lessons from my hard experience. But among the lessons I learned was how great a guy Donald Trump is. When I was on that show back in 2009, I was probably, I was condemned as this guy that was trying to sell Barack Obama a Senate seat, which incidentally was never a crime. I was right the whole way. The appellate court reversed that years later after I was in prison. But Donald Trump was the only man, a person of prominence in America who actually didn't believe the lies that were being told about me. And I'm on there fighting by myself. I get thrown out of office. It's a terrible lie that they said. And, at that time, Obama was a demigod. The media had propped him up to be something that he never really was. He was the idea we liked, but he wasn't that person. But in any event, I was condemned worldwide. And one person kind of saw through it. It was Donald Trump. And so he saw me, I think, on the David Letterman show, Sean, and I was invited to do the Celebrity Apprentice show. A show, incidentally, I never watched because I was busy being the governor. And then I did the show. And, among the things I experienced on that show was Joan Rivers, a very nice woman, haranguing me for serving her a hamburger that was apparently a little cold, one of the projects. But the thing I really learned was Donald Trump being such a nice, kind man. He was so kind to me off the camera. He was kind to my little girls because he saw little girls who were hurting because their father had been so maligned and was facing a long time in prison. Kind to my wife. And people don't realize what kind of a nice person, a kind person he is. And so my relationship with President Trump began on that show. And look, I've been fired before. He's not the only guy who's fired me. They fired me when I was governor, which they shouldn't have done. But he's the only guy who's fired me who I really love.
Well, it was a show. So, but take us back to that day. You're on the David Letterman show doing the rounds after leaving the governorship. And does someone just call you and say, hey, Governor, Donald Trump wants to have a conversation? Or is it like Mark Burnett, the executive producer? And what's your reaction to that conversation?
Well, yes. I was typecast as such a scoundrel back then, Sean, and I couldn't make a living. When you face something like that, people in politics, understandably, they're afraid, so they run away from you. They treat you like a leper. I was so maligned in the media, and I was the only guy in Illinois politics who didn't get rich in the business, but they took away my job. And I didn't have any income, and we have a mortgage, and we had our daughters in school, and it was hard to make a living. And then I discovered that in the entertainment world, you can probably make a living. But the problem was I was being offered, because I was typecast as such a scoundrel, I was being offered these crazy things like the HBO show. Back then, there was a show called The Bunny Ranch, another show that I never watched, by the way. And it was about a house of prostitution in Henderson, Nevada. And they thought I was perfect for the role of being a greeter. So when these guys, these Johns, would go to the whorehouse, I would greet them. right? This is how they offered me six figures to do it. But I got two little girls, and frankly, I didn't go to law school to be that, so I politely declined. And there were
You know
other
what's funny?
opportunities.
Governor,
Yeah.
is first of all, it says a lot about you because there's a lot of people that would take whatever it could be, right? And there's something about looking yourself in the mirror, and you keep remarking about your girls, and there's something that says, I want to be able to look them in the face and say, Daddy's working hard, but not embarrassing. And I when you say that, it strikes something in me, because I remember some of the offers that I got afterwards, leaving the White House, and said, if you'll do this in this commercial. I literally had one commercial offer me $500,000 if I did this sort of silly little thing. And I looked at my wife and I said, if you think this is worth it, I would do this for the family, but I have a hard time looking myself in the mirror saying that I'm, making a fool of myself just so that we could say we have extra money. And, we weren't rich, but we weren't poor. And I said, I don't. So I think that story makes people need to understand that like you do get offered some money that could really help, but also it's you got to look at yourself in the mirror. And I think that's something that speaks to your character.
Well, that one, maybe my character, I think you're right. Here's one that speaks to my vanity. I was offered $10,000 to shave my head on TV. And I didn't want to do it because I'm vain and, my hair colors are constantly changing.
You do have good hair. You do have good.
Well, it's darker now than it was when I left prison. But I wasn't going to shave it for $10,000. And that was not about honor or character. That was just pure vanity.
Yeah.
But I did get this wholesome offer. Two things. NBC offered me a position on a show called I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, where they put you in the jungle in Costa Rica with other celebrities, and the public watches you live on television, and they vote you off the island. And the judge wouldn't let me go. They took my passport, so I couldn't do that. But my wife did it. My wife, Patty, did it. Ate a tarantula on national TV because it was a way to, frankly, support our children. She was really heroic the way she did it. I think President Trump saw her because he would tell me on Celebrity Apprentice how much he saw her on that show, how much he liked her. And then after that, his people offered me the spot on Celebrity Apprentice. It went through my publicist at the time, a great guy by the name of Glenn Selig, who was killed in Afghanistan while I was in prison. He handled all of that. And then I showed up in New York and met President Trump, and he was so good to me. He saw a guy that was being brutalized in the media, and he saw a guy that was fighting back. And I think in some respects, maybe, Sean, he saw a little bit of himself in a smaller version of himself in me. And, the great irony is that what they ended up doing to me, they ended up doing to him. Right. And this whole weaponization, I think, started with me, and they took it to a higher level to do it to President Trump. So in some respects, Sean, we have I don't know President Trump very well, except I know how great he's been to me. It's really been a one-way street. He's always done things to be kind to me. But I think that there's something about when, weaponized prosecutors go after you the way they did President Trump, so corrupt, so dirty, so un-American, what they did to him, trumping up fake crimes for partisan political reasons. When you recognize it happens to somebody else, it creates a certain bond of shared experience. And I think in that respect, President Trump and I have a unique understanding. I'm not claiming to be, close to him, and I'm not. But I have to say this: I sure do owe him. And if he ever asked me to do anything, just about anything, except maybe that whorehouse in Henderson, Nevada, I think I'd do it.
I actually have said in not as eloquent ways that you just did that I think President Trump has a shared experience. People ask right now, why does he feel sympathy for Eric Adams in New York? And I think that for exactly the reason that you just articulated, there's this sense of understanding what people are going through. Now, I'm not saying that Eric Adams isn't guilty or that he did or didn't. I haven't paid enough attention to the case, but I think he personally understands what it's like to be attacked by the media, to have the judicial system weaponized against you, and has a little bit of sympathy for people who have gone through a similar experience. But just take me back to that time, because when you're on Celebrity Apprentice, he's kind of at his highest. He hasn't announced for office yet. Everybody still wants to hang out with Donald Trump. And he didn't have to be, he wasn't the politician he is now. So he meets you. You mentioned like he's good to your wife and your kids. And what are those behind the scene moments like?
Yes, I'm glad you asked me that. So this was October 2009 when we filmed that. It aired in, I think, February or March of 2010. But It was being filmed in October 2009. And you're talking 6 years before, more than 6 years before he goes down the escalator at Trump Tower in 2015 May to announce for president. So at that time, it never ever crossed my mind that Donald Trump would be interested in running for public office, or certainly one day ever being president. I felt like this guy had such great success, and he was in everything he touched. He had the Midas touch, still does. He's a winner. But I never ever imagined that he was going to be president of the United States one day. I was just trying to stay out of jail. And here I am on his show. And, I'll tell you a story, I think, Sean, that really sums up the person that he is. It was the last episode. It was after the rest of us had been fired, and all the contestants were invited back for the final round between the two finalists. And it was Holly Robinson Pete, a very nice woman who was a TV star apparently, and this guy, Bret Michaels, from the rock band Poison, who I never heard of, frankly, but he was really
Wait a
popular.
second. You grew up in Chicago and you'd never heard of Poison?
I'm an Elvis fan, and by the way, Bret Michaels is too. But I didn't know anything about that. I was busy trying to become governor, and congressman. But then I met him. He was a really good guy. Bret is, I'm sure, God willing, doing well. But it was the finals between Bret Michaels and Holly Robinson Pete. We're at New York University. There's a sold-out crowd there, maybe 700 people before a live audience. We're all on the stage. And President Trump is like purposely giving me airtime. He's trying to give me airtime to try to make, help me, rebuild my reputation. But I was on message, and I still am, because I didn't do it. And I said something like, I never crossed the line, never broke a law, never took a penny. And then the audience started laughing derisively. They weren't laughing with me. They were laughing at me. And I could handle it. I was in politics, and, you develop a thick skin in that business. But the Trump team, Celebrity Apprentice, were so kind. They allowed me to bring my little girls and my wife with me to New York for that particular weekend that we did the show. And so my little girls are in the audience, and my little Andy at the time would have been, 2009, she would have been 6. And my older daughter, Amy, would have been 13, and my wife, Patty, were there. And the show's over, and Bret Michaels wins, and Patty and Amy and I, my daughters and my wife, are on an elevator going down to leave. And just as it happened, Donald Trump walked in to take the elevator ride with us. And I introduced him to Patty, my wife, and my 2 little girls. And when the ride was over, we stepped outside, and we were on the street. He shook my hand, wished me good luck on the trial. I told him we're going to win because I didn't break a law. And then he got down. He's tall, he's about 6'3", and my daughters were just little girls. He got down to their eye level. There were no cameras there. He just sensed that their father had been laughed at in a derisive manner, and that they had witnessed it. And he started saying some real nice things to my girls about their father. And I'll always remember that kindness, and how good that was, and how nice that was of him, and how perceptive he was, and how sensitive he was to these little girls and what they think about their father. That really says a lot, in my opinion, about the kind of person that he is. And I've known presidents. I knew Obama since 1995. Bill Clinton, I served in Congress for 6 years when he was president. George W. Bush was president for a couple of years when I was congressman. Biden, I knew when he was in the Senate and I was in the Congress. None of them would have even thought about doing something like what Donald Trump did with my daughters on that day.
I get asked once in a while about what we don't see, what I know about Donald Trump that we don't see. And I share similar stories to what you just said, the ones that I've seen. That when people are in pain or in a difficult situation, that guy has the ability to be so empathetic to folks and express a sense of shared sacrifice and concern. It's unbelievable. And I don't think the public gets to see that. I don't know, to your point about not the cameras not being around, I almost sometimes feel like he wants to show that to people personally, but he doesn't want the world to see it. I don't know what you think of that. I just feel like he wants to project this sense of strength, fortitude, but on a very personal level, he knows what to say, when to say it, to people who are in pain or in anguish. And I don't know, sometimes I wish that they could see that, because there's a side to him that I wish people could see more. I remember Chief Ryan Owens was killed in action during my tenure at the White House, and he had to call his wife Karen. And I'm in tears in the Oval Office as he's comforting her and their children, inviting them to the State of the Union to be his guests. And he knows how to rise to an occasion and he almost senses that I can help you in that moment. And it's just, I wish people could see it more.
Well said. Yes. And here again, I was in politics, congressman, governor, 6 years. As I said, I've known, different presidents in different ways. But Obama, I've known for a long, long time, and him the best. I've known him since 1995. We both came up in Chicago politics together.
Yeah,
But
he was an advisor to your campaign, right?
yeah, that's what he says. And he said he helped. He showed up to like policy meetings. Big deal. You know what I mean? He didn't do really real work to get me elected. He was about as involved in my campaign for governor as he was as a community activist on the south side of Chicago, which is to say he was neither one of those things.
Okay, got it.
And he's not the compassionate guy Trump is. And, we talk about, people who are human and real and who can actually feel somebody else's trouble and their pain and the hurt. And President Trump has that capacity, very different from all those other presidents I met, and very different from almost everybody in politics that I've known. There's some politicians, elected officials who sort of have that, but very few. And that's the sad thing about the way President Trump gets treated by the media, is that he is the most real of these presidents and the most real of these politicians. I think it's another reason why he's got such a strong base of support, because most of the American people get it right, and they see that as well. But I've experienced it firsthand, not just the pardon, not just the commutation, but that kindness to my little girls on that elevator that day. When I was in one of my darker moments, as you can imagine, when you feel like the whole world's coming out to get you, and you're about to go to trial and you're facing all these fake charges, but they're talking about life imprisonment. And here's Donald Trump with my little girls, so kind and so good. I'll always remember that.
Yeah. So you finish up the show, you get sentenced to jail. Do you ever stay in touch with the guy, or is it the show's over and what's the contact like with Trump after the show ends as your judicial woes continue?
Well, so the show aired, I think, in March or February. I think it was actually March of 2010. And my first trial began in June of 2010. It was a long trial. Like on the 20th of August, they failed to convict me on any of the corruption charges. And then they were hung juries. And it's hard to get acquittals when, I'm a Democrat governor. You're going to have some Republicans on the jury. They don't like you. And you're a politician. It's very difficult when you find yourself in that position. But we shocked the world. They didn't convict me of any of their corruption stuff, 23 counts or something. And then they announced right away they were going to try me a second time. So right after the Celebrity Apprentice was over, it aired. And then before the first trial, I received a nice note, handwritten note by Donald Trump. And this would have been June of 2010. And he thanked me for being on the show. And he said that was their best rated season up to that point. And it was pretty nice, right?
Did you save it? You still have it?
I saved it, but I saved it never thinking he's going to be president of the United States and maybe one day be on Mount Rushmore, because I think he's going to be a great president. No, I saved it because I felt a real sense of friendship to a guy I hardly really knew. I saved it as a personal memento from a guy who was so good to me. That's why I saved it. And I still have it.
So good. Now it's worth a lot more.
Yeah, but see, I didn't sell the Senate seat. I'm not selling that.
I get asked all the time. Like, I have a bunch of signed stuff for him, my commissioning document. And for, I don't know, if it's the same. I'm like, no, I'm not selling this. This is an honor to have. I mean, I don't know that my grandchildren will ever want it, but I'm like, I'm not just giving this up. Someone's, offered a decent chunk of change, but I'm with you. It's kind of personal and cool now.
Right.
All right. So you get this note. Let's keep going. So how do things start to play out for you? And is there any contact?
No, not at that point. But here's what happened. So between the first trial and the second trial, this would be now, we're talking 2011. Now the Republican candidates are lining up to run for president, Romney and McCain. And I think McCain, no, but Romney at that time, I think Santorum, I think Newt Gingrich, others, 2011, 2012 cycle. And suddenly Donald Trump's name was starting to be mentioned. And I was given a talk somewhere here in Illinois, getting ready for the second trial. And I was asked about Donald Trump, whether or not, I thought, his candidacy was legitimate. And I was asked this question by these smug media, reporters who really don't know anything about politics. They don't play the game. They just cover it, and they think they know, but they really don't know. And they were dismissing his chances. And I remember vividly saying, you know what? and the Democrats were laughing at it. And I was a Democrat governor. My fellow Democrats would make a big mistake to underestimate Donald Trump. Here's a guy, they'll underestimate him like they did Ronald Reagan back in the late 70s and throughout the 1980s. They'll underestimate Trump, like Lincoln was underestimated back in the late 1850s and in 1860 when people didn't think there was any chance that Lincoln could be president. This guy, I said, he wins at everything. He works hard. He's really smart. He's tough. And he has convictions and beliefs, and he'll stand up for these things. I remember saying this. And it's interesting, too, if I could just say one more thing about the previous experience on Celebrity Apprentice. You'll find this interesting because this better than me because you work with him. But he's the hardest worker in the world. He's hands-on. He works hard, and he's not just above it all. He works hard. And I noticed that on Celebrity Apprentice while we're filming his show, and they would wake us up at like 5 o'clock or 5:30 in the morning for like they call curtain call or some sort of thing where you get lined up and you get your makeup, and we'd start filming like around 7 or 7:30 in the morning. He'd be there. And all day long you're filming, you're doing your projects, and then in the evening we get together in that boardroom, where you're either going to survive for another episode or get fired, right? But during the course of that day while we're filming the show, it's at Trump Tower, I was on an elevator coming back from a project with Darryl Strawberry, New York Yankees and New York Mets and Los Angeles Dodgers, superstar baseball player, great guy, by the way. We're coming back from the project we did, and there's Trump. And he's got a couple of people with him, and he sees me in the elevator, and he asked me to come out. He introduces me to these people, and it was a couple from Milan, Italy. I'll always remember that. And he was literally showing them office space to rent a Trump Tower, and he was showing them the build-out of that space. And I was really impressed with the fact that he was so hands-on. While we're filming this show, he's taking the time to personally try to bring tenants into his building and to actually show them how their office space would work and how it could look if they, signed the lease and became tenants. So,
he still does that, by the way. You walked through a Trump property with him ever, still to this day, and I've been through several of them with him. He stops and he's like, bring someone, hey, look at this thing, move that vase there, push this. I mean, like, he is unbelievably hands-on. I toured the Trump Hotel with him in Washington before its official opening, and he knew down to the spec the different aspects of the hotel, the flooring, the ceiling covers, the drapery. I mean, like, it was just, it is unbelievable how hands-on he really is.
Yes. And so that would have been October 2009 when that happened. But fast forward 2011, summertime, second trial. They use unlawful standards to criminalize legal things, including the sale of the Senate seat, which eventually the appellate court reversed. They called it routine political log rolling. Obama started it. He wanted to make a deal. We talked about a deal. I went to prison. Obama went to the White House. They kept me there for 3 fundraising requests because they could not let me out because it was so highly charged and political. And so when it's time for me now to walk into prison, which would be March the 15th, 2012 on a Thursday, one of the worst days of my life, but they're covering it live on television. All the national news is covering me walking into prison live. I didn't know it at the time, but years later, in fact, 5 years ago today, I learned about it because that's the day Trump pulled me out of prison. And a young guy who helped me come out, worked with my wife Patty to help me come home, a guy by the name of Mark Vargas, showed me a tweet that Donald Trump, private citizen Donald Trump, sent out on the 15th of March 2012 as he was watching me walk into prison. And it was a tweet talking about how unfair and how unjust he thought that was, what was happening to me. So even then, he was, kind to me. And then another,
which by the way, no one that again, this gets back to the point that you were making earlier, Governor. That's not the time when you get a lot of friends. The day you're walking into prison usually isn't when people are sticking their neck out for you. And there he is tweeting out support for you.
Well said. I'm so glad you brought that up. Absolutely. What does that say about someone who does that? It's remarkable. Here's another thing, Sean. So I can't get justice in the courts. They reversed the sale of the Senate seat, the thing I'm known for, the thing they arrested me for at 6 o'clock in the morning with a 24-member SWAT team around my house. I'm the governor of Illinois, a hostage negotiator. How ridiculous was that? And they did this big press conference with all these lies, and they cover up 98% of the FBI tapes. To this day, they're still covered up. Obama's 302s to this day covered up because he started the whole thing. He sent someone to me to make a political deal. He goes to the White House. I go to the big house. He runs away. And now I'm in prison at that time for 6.5 years. And I had been the first governor Democrat to endorse him for president against Hillary Clinton in 2007. And again, I knew him since 1995, and it was helpful to him way more than he was to me. Some of his friends got big positions in my administration when I was governor. And now we're asking him, and I wouldn't talk about him, and there was nothing to talk about because it was political, it was horse trading. But I could have maybe made it easy on me if I would say certain things about him, but I wouldn't do it. In any event, now we're asking him to see if he can cut me loose when he leaves on January 20th, 2017. He's been president for 2 terms, and we even say don't even let me out the day you're leaving, so we don't embarrass you when you leave the White House on the 20th of January, and I limp out of prison on the 20th of January. Just cut my sentence in half from 14 years to 7, which would make me a governor who spent more time in prison than anybody, I think, in American history. That's all you got to do, and I'll limp out of prison 9 months later, in October 2017. And he had commuted the sentence of a guy by the name of Bradley Manning, who had committed treason against our
Yes.
country. He got 35 years in prison. By the time Obama had a week before pulled him out of prison, he did like 6 years or 7 years, he'd become Chelsea Manning. He had changed his gender while he was in prison with the taxpayer money. Obama pulls him out. Then he pulls out a FALN terrorist who was conspiring to blow up federal buildings.
Out in Colombia, right?
Yes. And this guy had refused an offer of clemency from Bill Clinton in 1999 when Clinton had let out some of his co-conspirators. They had renounced that they would do anything like that again. This guy wouldn't even do that. So he stayed in prison. Obama pulls him out. Now I think my chances sure look good, I mean, I've already done 6.5 years, and none of it was criminal, and Obama knows it because he started it. And I've got Democrats, old friends like David Axelrod, Democratic congressmen and women from Illinois, and some others lobbying him to let me out. He doesn't do it. 1 month later, President Trump has been president for less than a month. I'm called into the case manager's office, and they say, I was told, the woman tells me that the White House the pardon office has just asked for your records from prison, and we can't send them unless you signed a waiver. And of course, I happily signed it, but that told me Trump himself wanted to see what kind of an inmate I was, whether I was well behaved. He already had his eye on maybe trying to see if there was a way to get me out of that nightmare that I was living, that deep, dark valley I was in.
I had sat with him in the private dining room when he had talked about you and Sheriff Joe Arpaio and others, and had asked the counsel's office for several of those files. And it was just interesting to watch that system. So play this forward for a second. So you sign this thing, and now you've got to go to bed that night thinking to yourself, hey, there's some light at the end of this tunnel.
Look, this whole thing that I'm telling you, Sean, God bless President Trump, him personally, but he's God's instrument. This whole thing's a miracle. My convergence, the convergence of events that would lead me in my life to intersect with Donald Trump's and be on his show, Celebrity Apprentice, during those years of trouble that I was in, and that he would be the one 5 years ago on this day to pull me out of prison, and that the people, some of the same people who did to me what they did, Fitzgerald, Comey, those people, Mueller, would be the ones who would go after him on Russian collusion and the other things. And that then President Trump would face what he faced in this last election with these phony charges by these Democratic prosecutors, in front of Democratic judges in Democratic jurisdictions, in front of Democratic juries, this hyper-partisan weaponization of prosecutions, which is terrible what they did to Trump, terrible what they did to me, but frankly, even worse what they're doing to the American people and to our country and to our democracy. But that they would do that to him, and that my life would intersect with his like that, and that he would have me on his mind. This is a miracle. It's God. I have no doubt about it. And
so what happens next? Like I said, you got it. They tell you, hey, Governor, there's some papers that you have to sign, and you got to think to yourself, okay, something's coming. When does that happen, and how does that transpire?
So I know enough about politics, and I know enough about that system, that court system, having been through it the hard way. What he gave me then in February of 2017, after he'd been president for a month or less, he gave me what we inmates call hope time. He gave me hope time because I'd exhausted all of my opportunities. I couldn't get justice in the courts. Obama now passes me by. I had one play left, the United States Supreme Court. And we believed we had a real good chance to get in there on the merits for sure, because the standard they used to convict me, it was one never used anywhere else in the United States in any other jurisdictions, and only once in the jurisdiction, the Seventh Circuit, that covers Illinois. So therefore, the Supreme Court has to take this case because they have to clarify where the lines are when you're requesting campaign contributions, because that's all this was. So we think we got a real good chance. Having said that, they only take 2% of the cases. So you gotta, you need to have the merits, and you gotta hopefully get their attention so they see it. But we thought we'd have a shot. And my belief was correctly that the White House and the people around President Trump would say, let him play out his legal remedies first before you intervene. You should be the last resort for, correct a wrong. And so at that point in 2017, February, my belief was that's how it would play out. It would take about another year for us to go to the Supreme Court. And this was correct. But what he gave me then was 1 year of prison where I had hope time, where I wasn't just hopeless, that right. Obama had passed me by. It was and all I had left was the Supreme Court. I still had two hopes, the Supreme Court and President Trump. And then the Supreme Court in 2018, the spring, 1 year later, decided it looked like they were going to take the case. The Supreme Court reporter, or this media outlet that covers the Supreme Court, predicted on Friday night that they were going to take my case. Of course, I follow this stuff carefully, Sean, because it's almost life and death. I want to go home to my family. And but I wake up Monday morning, and always I would get the bad news, because it'd be on the news before even my lawyer or my wife could tell me we lost again, or we didn't get justice like we were seeking. And so it was on all the news outlets early in the morning that the Supreme Court declined to take the case. If they took it, they reversed it, no doubt. But they didn't take it. Now it's only Trump. That's all that's left. And here again, the hand of God and the kindness of Donald Trump. That night, Monday night, after the Supreme Court said they weren't taking the case, my wife Patty is invited to go on Tucker Carlson's show on Fox. And Tucker was so kind to her, and he brought up, the nature of the circumstances, and that if I didn't get help from Trump, I'm there for another 6 years. And that was the beginning of events that unfolded, that I write about in this book that I'm writing, that have ultimately led me home 2 years later. And it would have been sooner, but President Trump's politics was so difficult, because what he was trying to do for me, a Democrat governor, didn't help him at all politically.
Yeah.
And problems politically with his own party.
So he commutes your sentence. That gets you out of jail. What transpired between then and now? Because you got it commuted, right? So you get out of jail, but you still have a felony record. Then he, like a week ago, whatever it is, pardoned you. Mm. What transpired between then and now to elevate this to a full pardon?
Well, you'd have to ask him, Let me say this.
There's no contact. Do you ask now, hey, thanks for the solid on that. Can I get the full pardon? Or is there any communication between your team and his team about, hey, now that you're back in office, can we go for the full pardon?
I'm so glad you asked that. Here again, how great he is. No, I never asked him for the pardon.
You never said anything. You don't talk to him, and all of a sudden you just wake up one day and it's, hey, guess what, Governor? You got the full pardon.
Well, I'd seen him through the years.
Yeah.
I've been to Mar-a-Lago several times. I got a chance 1 year after I was sent home, and after President Trump, the first term was over, and he was down at Palm Beach, and I went to Mar-a-Lago on the invite of Chris Ruddy from Newsmax. You know Chris.
Yep.
And he had arranged for me to see President Trump so I could personally thank him for what he did for me. And I saw him. This would have been February, March of 2021, and he was great. And I thanked him. And and he was telling me how much he loves my wife Patty. He always does this, by the way. And he's right. My Patty's defied the odds. But he always tells me this, and
he's reminding you. You know what? Any woman that's what we all learn as good husbands, is that so once in a while you need a little reminder of how great your wife is.
Yeah. And then he said to me, didn't you, because he noticed my hair color got darker, didn't you like the white hair? I thought it looked good. I said, I didn't like it. So he actually noticed that, right?
Yeah.
But he was great. But this would have been February 2021. And then a year later, he puts out a book, or a year or two later, he puts out a book about letters to Trump, which is a bestseller. Yeah. And he put the letter he wrote to me in that book. And then I was invited by Sergio Gore, an excellent guy, to come down to Mar-a-Lago for his book, like a book event,
Launch. Yep.
a book launch. And I saw him again, and he saw me, and he always so nice, telling me about my wife, how great she is, blah, blah, blah. And then he says this, Sean, you like this. And then he catches himself and he says, "You're still with her, right?" Absolutely. Absolutely. This he does all the time too. And then, last spring I brought a bunch of guys down to Mar-a-Lago. They wrote big checks for his campaign. So I was able to be helpful to him a little bit, and he just was really nice. And here again,
does the pardon just show up the other day? I mean, literally, is there any heads up that you get, or did you literally hear it when I heard it?
No. What he called me 2 Saturdays before. On a Saturday night, I'm at home with my wife Patty. We're watching an old movie together. Quiet Saturday night. Sergio Gore calls. I recognize his number because I'd worked with him on the campaign to do fundraising and other things that I've done. And I say, "Hey, Sergio, how you doing?" And Sergio just got a big position as sort of like the
head of personnel.
Head of personnel. I said, "Hey, Sergio, how you doing? Congratulations on your big spot." And then he says, "Hold on, Gov, I've got an old friend." And then he hands the phone, and it's Donald Trump. And we're on the phone for about 7 minutes. He was fantastic. And he's, talking to me about a variety of things, asks me about my wife, Patty, again. "You're still with her, right?" I said, "Madly in love." It's like the 5th time he's asked me since I've come home. Madly in love. And he tells me how great she is. And then he says he's going to pardon me. And we talked about that. I expressed my gratitude over and over again. I said, "Listen, what you've already done for me is above and beyond anything I could have ever anticipated, because, Mr. President, you just gave my little girls, when you pulled me out of there and brought me home, you gave my little girls the best gift they've ever received and they'll ever receive in their lives. They got their father back because of you." Wow. And so I never, ever dared to even think about asking him for a pardon, even though I got to tell you, Sean, absolute innocence. I didn't break a single law. So in that sense, I deserve one. But this was him, all him.
Our time is short. So let me and I appreciate God. This is an unbelievable conversation. So thank you for that. But I will just, there's a lot of buzz, and I know you've been asked this before, but any chance that you end up as ambassador to Serbia?
Well, you know what? My father came from Serbia. I'm the son of an immigrant. My dad was from there. He was a factory worker, and my mom was American born. But, I love that country because my father came from that country. America's my country. This is the country you and I both love, and you served our country. Thank you for your service. But I've never asked for that either. And I was in Serbia about 2 weeks ago. I met with President Vučić there. It's a remarkable story what that president in that country is doing, because I was there one time before in 1999 when I was a congressman, and I accompanied Reverend Jesse Jackson. We were bombing Serbia. NATO was bombing Serbia. We took part of their country away, incidentally, without UN approval, just like what Russia's done in Ukraine, no different. And the Serbs were getting bombed, and their economy was destroyed. And all those years later, I finally come back, and it's an economic miracle that President Vučić is presiding over. Real wages for working people have increased 270% from what it was when he took office.
I'm hearing a yes, Governor. I'm just telling you, I'm hearing a yes.
No one's
if asked, you'll serve.
If President Trump asks me for anything, it's hard pressed for me to imagine me saying no to anything he asks.
Okay. All right, Governor, honestly, there's sometimes when you start a story and you don't know where it's going to end in a conversation like this. And I've really and thoroughly enjoyed hearing this, because I always love the personal side of Donald Trump, and I appreciate you sharing it. So thanks for spending time with us today and sharing your story. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate you, my friend. Thank you.
You bet. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. What a great show. I dropped my next newsletter today, SeanSpicer.com. It's free to join. VIP members are always welcome. But please go to SeanSpicer.com. We'll give you a heads up on the show, great insights and behind-the-scenes pictures. It's always a great thing. I'll be at CPAC this weekend. I'll have some insights for you when I get back on Monday. Stay in touch. And by the way, hit that notification button if you're watching on YouTube. A couple really cool videos coming out exclusively the people who hit the notification button this weekend. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.